Welcome back to another episode of the Startup Therapy Podcast. This is Ryan Rutan, joined as always by Wil Schroeder, my friend, the founder and CEO of startups.com. Wil, we talk an awful lot about how much a startup can cost the founder, right? The emotional toll, the physical toll, the financial toll, all of these things. But it turns out there's quite a bit of collateral damage that can happen around the founder. How does that manifest? What's that look like? What are the costs for everybody else?
Can we just start with your NPR voice? It sounds amazing.
Yeah. It turns out you just have to have a really shitty head cold for 5 days and you too can have this voice. So if anybody's looking for work for movie trailers, if there's any hits coming out this summer that need a voiceover, I'm your guy, Ryan at startups.com.
In a world.
That's right. In a world where startups have collateral damage to everyone around them.
It does sound amazing. I'm loving this. All right, I couldn't let that one go. But so founders, they get all the credit for having all the misery. and yet, it's all the people around them that get to share in that misery in a way that kind of goes overlooked. And so, one of the things that they said, there used to be an analogy or an adage that I don't think gets used anymore, which was for every great man, there's a great woman behind him, which was like one of those sexist, right? Yeah. Like things like it was supposed to be complimentary for its day, but times have changed. Now, it's an offensive thing to say. So forget about the genders for a second. For every great founder, there's countless people that support them, often whether they realize it or not. I'll give you an example. I'm at dinner with a friend of mine, a founder. Yeah, that's another way to put it, right? I'm at dinner with a founder friend of mine. It's like a couple months ago. And it just happened to be me, him, and his wife. My wife was busy doing something else, and I ended up just being the three of us. And so we're talking about life and foundership and all this stuff. And he's talking about how hard he has it. And he does, right? His life's hard, right? And I look over and his wife's just sort of shaking her head. Right. And I'm like, what is it? She's like, all he talks about is his end of the problem. Right. Like, and she's very boisterous. Right. She's like, never in this conversation, when I listen to him talk about this stuff, do I ever get any recognition for all the stuff the rest of us get put through? And it was interesting, because it was almost like she was just looking for a moment to vent and found it in me. Sure. But she wasn't wrong. And that was the thing. So he and I are sitting there watching her vent, both thinking, she's sort of not wrong. It's kind of hard to push back. And that's really what, got me thinking about it. And as I look around, look at my support system, I know you look at your own, Ryan, you wonder what that toll really looks like,
Yeah. Curious though, during that conversation, as she started to lay out the various ways in which she sacrificed for the startup to do its thing, Did he seem to recognize it at that point, or was it still kind of like, I don't get it? Was it just that he hadn't considered it, or was he just not kind of, sharing the accolades, or was it some third variant that I'm not thinking of?
I think like when you're the one going through the pain firsthand, you're so busy processing that pain. It's really hard. And this is sort of the point of what we're going to talk about today, to step back and say, wait a minute, who else is being caused pain? I'll give you two other examples. And these actually just both, I heard about these in the last month, different friends, different conversations, neither of them founders. One friend talks about how he went through stage 4 lymphoma and made it through the other side, and how his wife divorced him because it was so inconvenient, right? No one appreciates what I'm going through. This is the wife. And it's like, bro, like your husband's dying. But to be fair, but that's my point though. To be fair, like he's literally the most critical condition you can be. And she sounds horrific for being out there complaining about it. But it was hard for her.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And she didn't have a voice or a platform to express that. Another case, actually reverse case, where a friend of mine, his wife's going through cancer, and he's complaining about how inconvenient it is for him. And I'm like, bud, she's the one with cancer, right?
Take the inconvenience.
And so it's amazing to me, again, as founders, how we lack the perspective to truly appreciate and really empathize with how other people are dealing with our struggle and the toll that takes. And I think that's important.
It is. It's funny because I think founders so frequently don't get that empathy or that commiseration because the people around them don't necessarily understand all they're going through. We talk about this a lot. And so I think they're so used to getting, zero pity, zero sympathy, zero empathy, that maybe it's hard to turn around. Or like you said, when you're going through the worst of it, you don't look around to see who else is inconvenienced. For example, when my wife was going through the pain of childbirth, she didn't look over to notice whether I was comfortably sleeping in the non-recliner chair in the corner of the room or not. The answer was I was not comfortable at all. And yet on a relative scale, I think I was doing quite well compared to where she was at in that moment. So I get it.
Exactly. I joke with my wife all the time. She, talking about pregnancy and stuff. I was like, honestly, I could do pregnancy again. It really was not hard.
And then run.
She looks at me like, yeah, if you're going to make the baby, let me know. But in this case, I think as founders, by not having a genuine empathy, appreciation, or self-awareness for the toll that we're creating on the people around us, not that we don't have enough shit to deal with, don't get me wrong, but not having that over time lets us forget, to our own detriment, what we're taking away from everyone around us. So I think today would be a good time to talk about, to lay out, what are all these different pockets of people in our lives? How are we affecting them? Right? How are we deeply and maybe forever affecting them? How are we ruining relationships? Founders listening to this, they're used to, how we dig into stuff and like, oh, damn, dude, that's probably more than I want to process right now. And it is.
Sorry.
But that's the point. Yeah. But that's the point. The point is it's always more than we want to process.
Sorry if this is inconvenient for you, but it's painful for them. So we're going to talk about
it. So let's take it from the top. Let's talk marriage. And again, not everybody that's listening is currently married or will be married. Doesn't matter. In this particular category, this is one of the most painful buckets because nothing derails a marriage like a good old fashioned startup company and everything that comes with it. Right.
For sure.
If you want to set TNT into a relationship, by all means, start it with a startup. That's the chain reaction you'll get every single time.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they're not, like you said, they're not exactly marriage enhancers, right? This is not something that's going to magically make the relationship easier, better, more enjoyable. Look, over the long term, maybe, right? When somebody's following their passion, they're doing the thing that they love, right? Your wife is running a startup company and it's absolutely fulfilling, and you have to, bear the brunt of the home life, the family, the whatever else you got to do, the side hustles to keep the financial means going. That can be awful in the short term. Maybe it works out great in the long term. Who knows, right? But there is certainly a toll on those.
Like, play it out though. Like with our wives, we're in this relationship. We've just gotten married, let's say. Let's just use this as a moment in time.
Which was accurate. Yep, we had.
Let's try to create as much new uncertainty and stress as possible. And this is before we might have children, right?
Yeah.
Let me put all my time into something that makes no money, that is complete uncertainty, that takes all my hours that I would otherwise invest in our relationship, that takes all my focus and attention that I could otherwise be giving to my wife. And now let's put it into something that's got the most explosive outcome possible, which almost statistically is going to guarantee that it's going to send me into depression, anxiety, bankruptcy, and everything else like that. Now let's go kick off a marriage on that and see where that goes.
It's all about how you spin it. I just explained it. I was like, look, right after we get married, it's going to be that honeymoon period. We're going to be up all night, every night, working on P&Ls and pitch decks and staffing plans. And
so sexy.
I know.
Yeah. Right. No, and I think that, from our standpoint, we have our eye on the prize, which is the outcome. That's what you talked about. Like, hey, if it works, maybe it was a marriage enhancer, right?
Yeah.
But it tends to not work. And even when it does, it comes at such an astronomical cost to get there. A lot of marriages don't survive it. And so from, again, being selfish here, we're thinking about ourselves as the founders and how it affects us. Now let's just flip the screen around. Let's talk about our spouses and what it looks like to them. Yeah. For example, this isn't their dream.
Correct.
Right? They're going to pay for it in our relationship, but it's not their dream. It's like having a kid you don't want. Right? It's like that's what you want. It's not what I want, but I'm going to pay for it. I'm going to, have the emotional connectivity to it. I think that's painful. You know what I mean?
For sure. And again, like, it's out of their hands. It's not something where, even if it works, there may be some benefit to it, but it's not like they get accolades for the suffering, right? So they're looking at it going, even if this does work, right? Like, is it worth it? I think when we look at the risk reward ratios, and again, especially if we use the actual probabilities of it working out, for somebody who's not getting the benefit as they go through the entire process, but only potentially benefiting at that final moment, it's a lot to handle, right? It's kind of like, why are we doing this, right? We keep pushing this rock up the hill every day, and there's no end in sight. And even the end, it doesn't look all that amazing, right? Basically, I get to stop pushing the rock. What a reward.
Right.
I could just not push the rock in the first place, right? It'd be a way easier decision.
Let's play that out because, again, let's say our wives were starting a business. So we'll use ourselves as the person kind of bearing this brunt. So Nargis, your wife, Sarah, my wife, in both cases, they're starting their dream business. And we dig that. We're supportive. Like at a high level, we care about them. We want to see things work. But here's what it looks like to us. We're not there in the sales meeting where they close that one deal and everything's great, where they get a high five moment. All we get is the shit at the end. All we get is them coming home exhausted, pissed off, frustrated, you name it, right? How often in the early days of a startup do you come home high-fiving because you've got so much energy and you don't know what to do with it, right? Never.
Day one, and then again on like day 10,005, I think.
Exactly. And so we get not the best of, but the worst of mixtape of their lives. Right?
Exactly. I think that's the thing that we have to remember, right? Is that when we come home and we just unload, or we're the ones getting unloaded on, and that's what it looks like. So you're also looking at this other person who you're supporting, complaining and suffering, while you're like, why are we doing this again, right? Like, why am I carrying this water for you when you don't even seem to be enjoying it? So like, if you're not enjoying it and it's not benefiting us, it's not benefiting me in any way, and I'm certainly not enjoying it, why the hell are we doing this, right? Like, that's kind of the only question that can be running through your mind on a regular basis.
Right. And that compounds at some point. Yeah. Like, I'm looking at my wife and I'm like, I don't get your attention. Like, I don't get the focus that we had before. All of the things that make for a great relationship were taken. Yeah. Right. Voluntarily, by the way.
We decided to mortgage them for a startup company.
100%.
Something that's really funny about everything we talk about here is that none of it is new. Everything you're dealing with right now has been done 1,000 times before you, which means the answer already exists. You may just not know it, but that's okay. That's kind of what we're here to do. We talk about this stuff on the show, but we actually solve these problems all day long at groups.startups.com. So if any of this sounds familiar, stop guessing about what to do. Let us just give you the answers to the test and be done with it.
Maybe I'm salty about it. Maybe I'm like, I never really wanted to do this to begin with. Again, this is going the other direction where I'm not supportive. And now I hate your startup, right? I hate everything about it because it represents a reflection of everything that I think is going wrong. Now, the irony is, chances are our relationship was probably going to be shitty anyway, but I don't know that. But now I have this straw man to blame everything on. And maybe it's accurate. It probably is, by the way. But what's interesting is I'm all of a sudden in a position, again, as the spouse, where I know I'm supposed to be supportive, but I'm not getting supported anymore. Like, I'm getting the shaft. I'm paying the cost, in my mind, of that startup, which is bullshit.
Constantly picking up the tab for somebody else's choices, right?
Yeah, it's a great way to put it. Picking up the tab for somebody else's choices. And, as founders, we can only punch that ticket for so long. Like, there's no point where we should be surprised that things aren't going well. Like, going into it, like with Sarah, my wife, Sarah and I had known each other for 10 years before we got married. And so she's only known me as a founder. So she's seen my wild schedule and everything else like that. Totally unfazed by any of it. Right. She, again, my wife is the quintessential Spartan, where her whole thing is when shit goes down, she's like, come back with your shield or on it. Like, she's fully down. And that is so rare. That is so rare. It's awesome. And I appreciate and love her for it, but it's rare. If she felt differently, here's what I'm trying to say. I wouldn't be surprised. I'm surprised that she's supportive.
Yeah, for sure. Over such a long period of time too.
How do you see it in your relationship?
I think it's been very much the same thing, and kind of in the same vein. We were together for quite a while before getting married, and so she'd understood kind of what the pattern of my life from a work perspective looked like, and that it very frequently invaded other parts of life because I let it and I wanted it to. I wasn't, I think I've talked this before on the podcast, where I don't believe in work-life balance because that's two opposing forces. I've always tried to create work-life blend where they just kind of seamlessly work together, which, like, that's easy enough to say, and it's actually not that hard to do, but it's a very individual decision, right? When I think about that blend, I'm thinking about how do I blend that, right? It wasn't necessarily a consideration of how do I blend that for everybody else. And so there's certainly been times where I've either directly asked or just implied, or not asked or implied, and she just found out she was going to have to support something that I maybe hadn't been super clear on, probably because I wasn't super clear on either. I didn't know. Right? I didn't know what the cost that was coming was. But I think in the same way that she's sort of understood that and understands the importance to me, and through her caring for me, she cares for the startup companies, right? And she's been there to support and carry and do all the things that I couldn't do, that I would have otherwise been there for if I was in some kind of a 9-to-5. Then we'd be supporting my therapy bill and my sports car and whatever else that I would need to do to justify being alive at this point. I think it's worked out. But it's not been without its challenges, and it's not been without its questions, right? There have definitely been times where it's like, is this still the right thing to be doing, right? Should we keep going in this path? What other direction could we take? And there's always questions, and they're valid, right? Because again, so much of this goes back to what we project and present, right? I've said this before on the podcast for sure, but communication is the burden of the sender, right? So if we are constantly just communicating the worst parts of it, right? We may have an 80-90% good day, but there's that one thing that really bugged us or bothered us, and we don't have anybody else we can vent to, moves to the top. And we don't have anybody else we can talk to about this shit, right? We can go to our colleague in the next office, right? That doesn't work. We talked about that before too. Politically within the startup, we don't have other channels and other places we can go and talk about this stuff. So we bring that home and we unload. And so when you do that and all you're presenting is the worst of the cards you've been dealt in any given time, it looks like you're playing a really shitty game with a really shitty hand all the time. And so then that becomes really hard to sustain, right? Like how much emotional energy can you pour into somebody who just comes back to you and is like, oh, it sucked again today. Cool. Right?
It's funny. So one of the things I asked Sarah for just this reason, when we sit down and kind of, catch up at the end of the day, I often ask, what's the best thing that happened in your day?
Yeah.
I say that because our default, if we start comparing notes, are going to be the shittiest things, right? This person pissed me off and blah, 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 right? And so it's almost forcing the other end of that conversation, just so we don't lose sight, right? That's not all negative, right? Like, she'll be like, my wife takes care of the kids full time. And so she'll be complaining about something dumb the kids did, right? And I'm like, well, what's the best thing they did today? Right. And it's a quick reminder that, there's good things that happen too. There aren't always. On that note, though, let's talk about the kids.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what happens to the kiddos in this situation. It's obviously similar. The common thread here is neglect. Right. The problem when we bring kids into the mix is that we're no longer dealing with adults who have the opportunity to not only process how this neglect might be working, or maybe why it's working, but also have years behind them and in front of them. When I say that, our kids have a childhood for a very fixed moment in time. We have a very fixed window. When your little Jack or my little Will walks into the room and says, hey, Dad, I want to play, and it's like 10 a.m. on a Tuesday and we have, shit to do, we often have to say, no, I can't. Got to work, right? Got to go pay some bills. They don't understand that. And they frankly don't care. And they shouldn't, right? They should be focused on being a 4-year-old kid or a 6-year-old kid or whoever they are, right? Teenager for that matter, right? But every time I get to send little Will back out of my office, I get into this thing where now I'm like, damn, dude, I don't get that moment back. I don't get that moment back to be able to, to spend that time with them. And more importantly, neither does he. He doesn't. He's got a one shot at a childhood. And what if I go 10 years and I fuck this up? And I look back, I'm like, oh, sorry, dude, missed your childhood, but I got a sweet startup going, right? Like, I'm not okay with that.
Had a rough conversation last week with a founder. He was talking about, he had challenges working from home. When everybody went home, he wasn't loving it in the beginning, right? And a big part of it was the family dynamic. It's like, I'm around all the time now. Everybody's coming and asking for my time. He has 2 little kids. And then we were talking and he's like, yeah, it's gotten way better. It's taken some time, but we've kind of found our cadence, right? They kind of know when the door is closed not to come in. Still happens sometimes, was happening. And then he got to this point where he was kind of like happy about it. And he was like, yeah, and they don't ever, wander in and ask me to play in the middle of the day anymore. And then he paused for a second and he was like, fuck, they don't come in and ask me to play in the middle of the day anymore. And he realized that he's now trained his kids that he's unavailable, right? And he was thinking of that as a benefit until he said it out loud. And he was like, that's not what I wanted. Right? It's not what I wanted. That was a cost that he realized he's now incurred, that he was asking for too, by the way. Like he wanted it to be that way until he got it. And now he's like, oh, damn. Right. Just to circle back on something, because you went through a good list. But I think there's one other point there around the kids in this whole thing. In addition to not having the emotional intelligence and just sort of the experience and all of that, there's one other thing they don't have that an adult in the situation has, which is agency to say no. Right. Another adult can say, no, I'm not going to support this anymore. I'm going to walk away from this. I'm going to leave you and your business. And you can do what you need to do.
Great way to put it.
Kid doesn't have that ability. Kid is stuck with it, right? Kid has no say on whether you continue to do this or not, or whether they continue their participation in it, right? They are they are along for the ride, whether they want to be or not, and without any chance for escape. So I think that makes it extra tough for them.
It is. And also, this is the only version of a parent they know. Yeah, right. Exactly. So like the only version of my dad that I know was that he was working 24/7. Right. That, he was out. He's a carpenter. So he's out, building shit. Right. And so that's all I know. I just know that he was never there. Right. Yeah. And a lot of people grew up with that. That's all they know of their parents. Yep. And every single time Will walks into my room, my daughter Summer walks into my office and is like, hey, I want to tell you something, or I want to share something with you. First thing that comes to mind is I will never get this moment with you again. Now, this moment might be something dumb, right? Like Will showed me the dumbest thing in the world, right? It's theoretically not an important moment. But what I'm not empathizing with properly, and this goes to the heart of what we're talking about today, is it's important to him.
Yeah,
right.
Course.
That was an important moment for him, even if it was incidental to me. I had bigger shit to worry about. He didn't. Right. That was the most important thing in his life. And I wasn't there for it. Right. And that's my loss. Now, part of that, it comes with the territory, but it's me recognizing and empathizing the weight that carries.
Yeah. One of my father's friends put it to me this way once. He was like, look, for you, when the kid walks into the room, you're the all-star, you're the athlete, you're the movie star, you're whoever. They're the one that wants the autograph. To you, each of those moments are just like the last, and you'll sign 1,000 autographs in your life. For them, each one of those moments is like the penultimate, right? That's the thing that they need and want right then. It'll mean a ton to them, whether it does to you or not. And that always stuck with me. That was like, I remember getting that advice. We were 6 or 7 months pregnant at that point, and I was going around and trying to collect as much knowledge around fatherhood as I could. Didn't do any good. Still got hit in the face with a frying pan the minute it happened.
And I think that for us as founders, trying to empathize, and I don't think there's like a ton of cold-hearted founders there. I think most founders would like to be able to spend time with their kids. Yeah. What we're missing, or we lose sight of sometimes, is, hey, I'm not home for dinner, so to speak, or hey, I'm not there for your games, or hey, I'm not there for you name it. Again, that's a small part of a bigger part of our life, but it's their only childhood. And that's what always sticks in my head, is that if I burn 10 years for a startup, in a successful startup, and I have a great outcome, I only have at most an 18-year window of their youth, of their childhood, right? And depending on how old they were when I started this whole thing, my startup may have come at the expense of their childhood. And that is a tough pill to swallow. Forget about how guilty it makes you feel. Again, that is a very selfish viewpoint. How does it make them feel? Right? Yeah. When they're sitting in therapy and they're like, yeah, my dad's, I guess, the super successful guy, wouldn't know, never saw him. Right. Again, I don't pretend to know the relationship that Elon Musk has with his 12 kids. But I can't imagine, for as much as that guy works, that they got a lot of reps with dad. Maybe they did. Maybe, who knows? Maybe there's 12 of them. All I know.
Maybe they all help him build rockets that actually go into space. My kids would be totally down for them.
I don't know. Another anecdote was, there's been a lot written and said about Steve Jobs and his relationship to his daughter, et cetera, and how it wasn't great. Right. It was not great. And you look at that and people will approach her. I think her name is Lisa, approach her and say, hey, your dad was this incredible man. It's like, not really. That was my dad. Yeah. Never saw him. He was kind of a jerk when I did see him. Right. Yeah. And what I remember of my dad wasn't what you think your dad is, nor what he thought he was building or how he's going to be insanely great about anything. What an insanely great dad. And guess what? It's the only thing I gave a shit about. Right. Because it's the only one I got. And I
bringing
think
to mind
about
a new stat. I'm going to call it CAC. CAC. It's childhood attrition cost, right? And it's real,
oh, Jesus,
right?
I don't want to track that stat.
I don't either, but like it's a real thing. To your point, right? There's one window for this. There's a real cost to it, and I'm not sure that there's a calculable ROI that I would want to even think through, right?
Oh God, yeah, no, it's terrible. Well, because this is one of those things where it's immutable. There's nothing about taking away from your child's childhood that you're going to feel good about. There's no version where like, good thing I spend less time with my kid. Unless your kid's a real dick, which is possible, right?
Yeah.
But like, short of that, I'm just saying that like, you're never going to look back and say, oh man, I wish I had less time with my kids. Right. Like it's such a finite thing. But again, that's being selfish. That's our viewpoint. It's really the other side, which is, man, I really wish my dad, mom, whatever, made more time for me. It's cool that they were doing whatever business that they're doing, but I kind of felt like it would have just been cool to have dad at my baseball game type thing. Right. And like, that's what my kids are going to remember. And that's what goes through my head when I'm shooing them out of my office for like good business reasons. But every time part of that calculus is, man, like, what's this mean for my kid, right? Like, where does that leave them?
Yeah, for sure.
Nothing good.
No, we talked about this on another podcast where we were talking about, there's no interest earned on happiness deferred. And particularly when you're doing this to a third party, again, like they're not seeing that core benefit. And especially as a kid, they're not looking like, well,
they don't care.
Well, look, startups have a 10-year life cycle, right? So at the end of this 10 years, that'll be great.
Right.
When I'm 14, this will be fantastic. Right. They don't care.
Yeah. Right.
Shit. And there was, I saw something a few weeks ago where somebody was asking their kids, it was something on social media, which I'm rarely on, but somebody on social media had this video where they were asking their kids, hey, do you remember your sixth birthday? Right? You remember your sixth birthday party? Right? What happened? And they told them, grandma was there and then you took us and we did, we went bowling or whatever it was. Like they could tell the story. And he's like, do you remember what I got you? Do you remember the presents we got you? No. He repeated this like 4 or 5 times with different kids and different ages. And they never remembered any of the stuff, right? So these tangible things that we're trying to achieve with our startup have no bearing on this kid, right? They will have no impact. And yet they will absolutely remember the time you spent with them, or conversely, they won't have those memories if you don't, right? And so then there will be nothing
100%.
to remember from the child. So there's a huge cost.
I don't remember what I got for any of those birthdays, but I sure as hell remember if my parents were there. Right. And they weren't always there. And so like those things those are the things that burn it in your mind, and that weight is real. Let's talk about friendships. Let's take it to another level. Just trying to maintain basic friendships, right? Just basic friendships. Now, I'm going to separate this from family. Like we can cover that at some other topic, but specific to friendships. These are just people that have been my best friend forever, or, somebody I've known since childhood, or somebody I've known since college, just somebody that's a really important part of my life. What happens to them? I feel like they're almost the first casualty. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think it is. I mean, in most cases, I can certainly say I've seen, some people who've maintained, friend relationships while letting the family slide, right? Like they don't have any time for the family. They still make a little time for the friends. They still have their hobbies or whatever. That's fair. But I would say those are the outliers. Yep. Those are the outliers. I think generally speaking, it's kind of like family, kids, spouse, and then it kind of comes down to the peripheral circles of friends. Again, like depends on how close they are. Like if they're friends, best friend's a co-founder, different story, right? Now sometimes that they end up getting forced away. There's a wedge driven there, but that's a different episode. So yeah, I think that it's often the first to go, and it's often very abrupt, right? This is the thing about a startup company, is that once it starts to consume, it eats fast. Right. It doesn't take a lot of time to build up. This isn't something where it's like, well, he used to come, twice a week to play poker, and now he's only coming twice a month, right? Or whatever it is. It's just like we were there one day, then you started a startup, and now you're not, right? You're just like the kid who left school. Like where did he go? Where did she go? So I think that's a big part of it. And I think there's a high, because we're, again, trying to consider the other side of this, right? I understand why the founder does that, right? You get consumed. But when you look at that from the outside, all of a sudden, this friend, this connection you had is just abruptly taken away. It's a huge shock to the system, right? And it's hard for them even to want to lean in. I've had conversations with my friends about this stuff where it's like, how did that feel? All of a sudden I went from being there to not being there, and they're like, well, shitty, right? We just thought you didn't care about us anymore. Of course we weren't thinking like, oh, he just has to spend all this time on a startup. Like, well, why can't you just stop at 5 like the rest of us do and do what we do? You could, maybe, kind of, sometimes, but not always.
I think what's interesting is if you take these 3 buckets that we're talking about, you got family, you've got kids, and you've got friends. The big difference there is with a marriage, you have a very visible construct. We are clearly married. It is the two of us, right? We're dating or whatever our situation is, but it's clearly we're probably living together and like we're with each other all the time and we're in each other's worlds and our finances are intertwined. We have a construct that is by definition completely rejuvenated every day that we have to keep rethinking about. Kids the same way. But when we get into friendships, the reason they become more disposable is because we're typically not hard coded to them. If I don't call my friend back in a week, right? It's shitty, but like, we'll get over it. If I don't call my wife back in a week, well, I just see her within the rest of the day, but you get the idea, right? Like, there's no optionality for those other 2 categories. I'm very much baked into those. Now, that doesn't mean people haven't been able to ignore families or, spouses, whatever. But with friendships, the problem is we don't have that recurring construct to fall back on.
Correct.
And really to reinvest in. So it often looks something like this. Ryan, you and I go start a company. And our friends are excited for us, hopefully, and they see a little bit less of us. Now, with our friends, we've known them for 5 or 10 years, maybe longer. And in that time, we've gone out, we've done a lot of things together, we've spent time, we've built memories together, we've put a lot in the bank. And as of now, we're never going to put any more. We're going to make a lot of withdrawals of what's in the bank, but we are no longer making deposits, right? We're no longer sharing those good times. We're making withdrawals and they look something like this. Oh, dude, I know we're supposed to go out for dinner tonight, but I got to bail last minute, blah, 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 right? Oh no, man, board meeting. Oh, can't do that. Oh, you guys going on that trip? Oh, totally can't do that. We're fundraising, blah, blah, blah. Like you name it. We now have this fountain of excuses for why we can't be good friends anymore, right? And a couple of them at first, making withdrawals from the bank. Yeah, dude, we got a lot in the bank here, right? I'll make it up to you next time. How many withdrawals can we make without making any more deposits until that relationship is straight up bankrupt? Right. And that's actually what this comes down to. It's wearing the relationships down until they go bankrupt. And the people on the other side of it going like, dude, you're not even trying anymore. That's the problem.
I just had this kind of thrown in my face a few weeks ago, and it wasn't done with any malice. But I had reached out to a friend that I hadn't talked to in a while, and was saying, it'd be great to catch up. And he said, catch up? Oh, we got to start all the way over again. We haven't talked in forever, right? And I thought that was a really interesting way of putting it. And I hadn't thought of it that way myself, but when he dropped that on me,
that is an interesting way of putting it.
That's accurate, right? Because I had essentially withdrawn everything from that bank at that point because we hadn't talked in a long time. There'd been those attempts, right? It was like, oh, let's talk this weekend. Yeah, that'll be good. And then it didn't happen, right? Oh, let's jump on the phone next week. Let's do a Zoom call. Hey, when are you going to be up in the US? When are you going to, right? And there were just all these like failed starts, and all of those are types of withdrawals. I think there's something else here, kind of rolling back to what you said about the family, the spouse. Of course, all of these things are predicated on some level of mutual investment, right? We have to be investing. Otherwise, if it's just all one-sided, nobody's going to do this. But there's a very different commitment level there. And I think that where, the spouse will continue to make one-sided investments, knowing or believing that there'll be some return on that in the longer term, that will continue to happen.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Kids, again, they don't have a choice. The kids are just going to be there, and they're just going to invest in you because that's what they have.
They're thrusting it.
The friends, on the other hand, the minute you're not mutually investing alongside them, the transaction doesn't work anymore, right? Not to boil friendships down to transactional mathematics, but like there is some degree of like, because we only have so much time to invest, right? And we only have so much time and emotion to invest. We're not going to keep investing in somebody who doesn't show up. And so at some point, the cost stacks up.
There's also no upside, right?
Correct.
If my friend does really, really well with their startup, good for them, right?
Yeah.
All I get is the shit. I just don't see them anymore.
Maybe you'll have a nicer grill the next time I come to a barbecue there. Cool.
Yeah, right. And not to be selfish about it, I'm just like, in the case of our spouses and we're building something together, we both benefit from some of the heartache. So you could kind of look at it, right?
What do you think about this? So is there, and I'm not justifying or trying to pick this apart, but like, is there some sense, like, and I'm just wondering, like, because of the cause of this, right? Is there extra pressure on that relationship because the friend looks at this as you making a selfish decision to try to grow something that you want to build, maybe for financial benefit, right? Maybe that's the only way they're seeing it. And is that part of that? Is that part of that thought dynamic? Is that part of why it's harder, right? That there's not jealousy that, you might achieve something that I'm not going to, but just sort of you chose this opportunity to grow something over me. Is that harder for people to deal with, I wonder?
Of course it is. No, and I wouldn't downplay the success part. We're all wildly self-conscious about our own success and our validation and our self-worth. So if you're out making a great life for yourself at the expense of our friendship, that doesn't sound very awesome. It sounds great for you. It sounds shitty for me. It doesn't feel like something I want to double down on. Right. I want to be a good friend and I want things to work well, but let's not forget that this is for your benefit at my cost. There's nothing else to it. There's no upside for me. And again, not to be selfish about it, but everything has a give and take to it. If what you're saying is, hey, I'll be around for you as a friend when I feel like it. And I'm like, oh, that's cool. Right. You used to be around all the time and now you're not around ever. Right. That doesn't feel great.
Yeah. It's funny. I'm thinking back to comments now made by friends about other friends, right? Where it's like, it's, they never show up. Right. Now, sometimes there's a caveat, right? He's not going to be here tonight. No, he's still dealing with, right. And they'll drop something in, right. They'll be like, the financial hardships the family's going through, the sick parent, the whatever, right. There's some caveat there that's a bit of an excuse. It's like the get out of jail free card, right? You're not here, but we get it. I rarely hear that when it's something where, and again, we've talked about this before too, which is that a lot of times people look at what startup founders do as this self-imposed punishment, right? We chose to do this. You picked this life. Right? This life didn't pick you. You decided to do this shit and this is the cost. So,
correct.
Eat it.
Suck it up,
right? Cost to deal with, right? So I think that's part of it too. I think that's definitely a piece of it is that there's not as much latitude or leeway given because it feels to anybody third party like this is just a self-imposed thing. You've chosen this. And so, you buttered your bread. Now sleep in it. Never understood that phrase. But.
I think that if we look at this, Ryan, this whole thing, in our effect on all of these people around us is a compounding effect.
For sure.
Because every single time we make one of those withdrawals and we don't have a deposit to back it up, it gets worse and worse and worse. And what happens over time is the people around us start to create this expectation that we're not the kind of person that makes deposits in the relationship anymore. And they start looking at our relationship and they start to say, you know what? That return on investment isn't really there anymore. And it's in subtle ways. It's Will walks into my office and in the back of his head now, he's thinking, Dad's probably just going to blow me off. So maybe I won't go in there anymore. Just like your friend was saying, hey, they'll come in to play with me kind of thing, right? Or our friend just stops inviting us to poker night or whatever the hell else night, right? Because they just kind of know we're not going to be there. Our spouse stops asking how our day went. Why? Because I don't want to hear you bitch again for the entire time over dinner, right? And so all of a sudden we start looking around and we start getting that feeling of loneliness, that feeling of detachment from all the people that were our support system. And I think the core of that and what we really need to pay attention to is the moment we step down this path, this journey, we are making withdrawals from all these folks. And there's a good chance that we may never make a deposit ever again anytime soon. And with that, if we don't stop, zoom out and say, damn, I am drawing from a lot of people. I have to figure out how to put this back. We will go emotionally and friendship and family and everything. All of that will go bankrupt.
So in addition to all the stuff related to founder groups, you've also got full access to everything on startups.com. That includes all of our education tracks, which will be funding, customer acquisition, even how to manage your monthly financiers. There's so much stuff in there. All of our software, including BizPlan for putting together detailed business plans and financials, LaunchRock for attracting early customers, and of course, Fundable for attracting investment capital. When you log into the startups.com site, you'll find all of these resources available.